Controversy. It's a word we tend to throw around a lot in the gaming culture, especially nowadays. From censorship to cutting out features that were always a part of the games they came with, there's always something happening that's throwing gamers into a tizzy. Even the often critically acclaimed Fire Emblem franchise has fallen victim to this trend. What with the whole Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem game turning into J-pop idol stories. But did you know that there are even more controversial changes to Fire Emblem that you have never heard of? Well, today I'm here to help you learn a little something with Fire Emblem's Top 10 Controversies. Number 10. Name changes. Now, this little tidbit is easily the least controversial subject on the list, but that's why it's number 10. It's still very interesting though, to say the least. As the Fire Emblem games have started to be ported internationally over the past decade, many changes were made to the games, and in particular, people's names. Many of the names in Fire Emblem continuity are references to mythological beings, often which tie into a character's persona, such as Nana from Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War being named after the Norse goddess, and weapons such as the Ragnarok and Guy Bulg being consistent throughout the series. So while localizing them to another country, it's difficult trying to maintain this while not having some ludicrous name that no one in a particular region would understand. One of the characters from Path of Radiance named Mist actually had to be renamed Alja, of all things, in the German localization, despite her name being one of a mythological Valkyrie. But why was it changed? Because Mist in German is a curse word. That means shit. Literally, shit. So take that as you will. Famously, Marth, the iconic swordsman from that one Fire Emblem game that you may have played, Super Smash Bros. Melee, was originally called Prince Mars when he made his first appearance internationally in Fire Emblem the anime. This anime's dub was so bad that it's good, and thus really didn't do much to help with Marth's appearance. Number 9. Cut content from Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem. Now here is where we get into some actual controversy for the series. The first one, to be exact, Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem is an oddity of a game, being a remake and a sequel at the same time. Coming out in 1994, it was a retelling of the original Fire Emblem from the Famicom, but with some things missing. 5 entire chapters, along with the 6 characters that were contained within them, were wiped away from the first game, titled Book 1. If your favorite character was within one of these chapters, they were gone forever. All of this was because the Super Famicom was a puny little device in terms of storage. Putting books 1 and 2 together was an impossibility with this console. So, as Book 2 was the one with the brand new content, Book 1 received the cut. While this didn't necessarily trample on the original experience, it still left many fans of the original game hurt for its loss. Number 8. Skinship. Here is where we get into what you, the viewer, might already know. Fire Emblem Fates has been one of the most interesting Fire Emblem titles to date. In controversy, I mean. This controversy all stems from the removal of one thing: skinship. Skinship was a bizarre idea introduced into Fire Emblem If, the Japanese version of Fates, where you could pet anyone who came over to your private quarters by rubbing your stylus all over them, just like Pokemon Ami and Pokemon Recover, but with people. And I mean anyone. Your brothers, your sisters, reincarnations of characters from past games who love it to death, and many more. This starkly contrasted with everything the Fire Emblem series previously stood for. A serious fantasy medieval drama with a bit of humor thrown in for added effect. So many people, in many reasons, were surprised by this addition. But the main chunk of controversy came when the news got out that this feature would be removed outside of Japan. The internet collectively revolted against its removal. There were petitions and fan outcry across the board for the removal of this petting minigame. A surprise compared to many of the other controversies that have plagued the series. Speaking of which, number 7. Fire Emblem GBA. Ah, the original Fire Emblem, or the original for the world outside of Japan. Released on the Game Boy Advance in 2003, many praise this game for its story and gameplay, but there's one significant portion of the game that was one of the few times where the series actually held your hand: Lynn's story. Lynn's story was the beginning of Fire Emblem for many, but in all actuality it was a bona fide tutorial that took up a portion of the game. It was all around easier than the rest of the game, requiring little strategy to complete. Even the series' iconic permadeath feature wasn't an issue, as any character who fell in battle in Lynn's story would still come back for the rest of the game. Worst of all, there was no ability to skip it and continue on with the main story. Or was there? As a prequel to the Japanese-only Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, there were some features that we were just never given. One of these was the ability to connect your save data from the Binding Blade to the new Fire Emblem, which allowed for something much needed. The ability to skip Lynn's dreadfully awful story. It was the classic old-school mentality of Nintendo all over again, thinking that a Western audience was unprepared for the difficulty that the Fire Emblem series entailed. Americans are dumb. This feature even included an epilogue that concluded the story fully and connected it to the Binding Blade, which was included in the North American version on the cartridge, but not in the European version for some strange and unknown reason. What is Nintendo doing? Number 6. Radiant Dawn difficulty modes. Fire Emblem 3CS 776 is considered to be the most difficult Fire Emblem by Japanese players and others who have played it, but to the rest of us, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn may just take that title, and all of it was because of a single translation mistake. You see, the Japanese version of Radiant Dawn had 3 difficulties: normal, hard, and lunatic. Each steps up the difficulty immensely. So if you can't handle these higher difficulties, there was always the bog standard normal mode. But the problem is, everyone else didn't know that. You see, internationally, normal, hard, and lunatic were changed into easy, normal, hard. This artificially increased the game's difficulty for many, as most would avoid the easy mode altogether, as, well, easy is always easy, especially in a strategy game. Easy mode's for babies. Or, people that just want to play a game for the story. Now, while Radiant Dawn was hard to beat just like any other Fire Emblem game, this changed people's opinions about it, with many review scores and the poor sales reflecting this, stating the game is far too difficult for players, when really, they were playing on hard mode, which is for experts. One single translation error changed an entire game, possibly ruining its reputation in the long run. Number 5. Gay conversion therapy. Fates seems to just love being the rowdy and controversial brother of the Fire Emblem family. While internationally, most of the story bits for the game stayed the same or only changed ever so slightly, one particular support conversation between your avatar, Corrin, and a single character rectified that. This scene was about Soleil, one of the many children from the Nor storyline. Like basically every single character in the game, you can choose to romance her with Corrin. In the American version, they fall in love and yada yada, it's all just typical standard romantic stuff, but the Japanese version wasn't like that, however. Not at all. In the cutscene, it's revealed, or at least heavily implied, that Soleil is a lesbian. At this point, Corrin apparently wanting to help Soleil, who implies that she can't concentrate on being a badass warrior when there's cute women around, spikes her drink with a magic potion, which causes Soleil to see men as women and women as men. This, to Nintendo of America, had to be cut out of the game as it resembled and somewhat advocated gay conversion therapy, a highly controversial practice that still exists today. Many, of course, cried foul at its removal, claiming that this was censorship, and thus debate ensued all across the internet. Number 4. Changes with Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. Once Fire Emblem entered the Game Boy Advanced era, the entire series was radically mellowed down from its previous entry, 3CS 776. Early adopters of the new system enjoyed the next entry, Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, for its simplistic yet colorful story, and found the previous games to be nothing in comparison. Binding Blade's gameplay was easy, to say the least, and required less thought than any map from 3CS 776. This shattered the Fire Emblem community into 2 sides. One that was hooked on the new direction the series was taking, and another who wished to dial back the clock to the era when Shozo Kaga, the series creator, was in charge. While Binding Blade's changes to gameplay and other departments helped make the series immensely more enjoyable to new audiences, since sales were on a drastic decline from their last entry, somewhere along the way it had lost its heart and soul of what it meant to be a Fire Emblem game, which caused this splitting of this community. After the initial negative reception of Binding Blade, it took a long while for the series to earn back the trust of its devoted fan base, but they eventually did earn that trust back. For a time. Number 3. Changes with Fire Emblem Awakening. Now, here is where very old school fans of the series get really testy. Fire Emblem Awakening, a game that is hailed by many as a fantastic game in its own right, is actually somewhat despised by the Fire Emblem faithful. Binding Blade had done much to appeal to the somewhat more casual gamer crowd, but not nearly as much as Awakening did. Casual mode removed permadeath entirely, negating one of the series' primary features. Players could grind endlessly with their units by heading back to old locations via the world map, turning their characters into super soldiers and making Awakening a breeze if you chose to do so. And the level cap was broken entirely to go along with this. You didn't even need to grind to make things easier, as the pair-up mechanic did that for you, allowing 2 units to join forces and make it all the more troublesome to kill you. So depending on how you played the game, Fire Emblem Awakening could be the easiest Fire Emblem game you've ever played, or the most difficult one. And this didn't set well with many fans. While Awakening saved the Fire Emblem franchise from its own demise, it couldn't save itself from its community, with many considering this another terrible turning point for the series. And also there was the whole Naui controversy, a little girl that you could marry and have a child with. But it's fine, because she only looks like she's 6, but she's actually a 1,000-year-old dragon person. Number 2. Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem vs. Awakening. Ever heard of Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem? I doubt you have, unless you're a more hardcore fan of the series. Coming out just a few years before Fire Emblem Awakening, many forgot this title even existed, let alone its importance to the Fire Emblem series in general. Most consider Awakening to have many innovations for the series, but in actuality a lot of that is owed to Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem. Awakening didn't introduce casual mode, New Mystery did, so a lot of the controversy around Awakening should be towards this one. New Mystery also introduced the idea of a playable and customizable avatar for the player, so they could be a part of the story. But more importantly, this entry is actually the hidden savior of the franchise. If New Mystery hadn't sold well, it may have been possible that the franchise would have been dead right then and there. It didn't sell incredibly well, only a measly 270,000 copies, but it was enough for Nintendo to go through with Fire Emblem Awakening. So without Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, the series wouldn't have the mainstream status that it enjoys today. And to many hardcore Fire Emblem fans, it is a huge tragedy that no one seems to remember that, or this game, at all. And number 1, the Tear Ring Saga lawsuit. This right here is the most important out of all of these supposed controversies. You see, back in the day, Fire Emblem was created by Shozo Kaga and his team at Intelligent Systems. They enjoyed great success for nearly a decade, with the franchise only becoming more and more popular by the day. Shozo Kaga created great, innovative titles such as Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, which introduced the weapon triangle, and was a sweeping historical and generational epic, along with Fire Emblem Thracia 776, one of the hardest games ever created. And of course, the original Fire Emblem, which paved the way for the tactical RPG genre. But as his franchise reached the end of its console era, he had looked to the Nintendo 64 for its next entry. Fire Emblem 64, Maiden of Darkness, would have been this, but soon after its apparent cancellation, Kaga left Fire Emblem and Nintendo behind forever. From here, he founded his own company, Turnanog, and went on to create the spiritual successor to Fire Emblem, Emblem Saga. But this wouldn't be on a Nintendo console, oh no, he was making it for the good old Sony PlayStation. Prior to the game's release in 2001, Turnanog received legal pressure from Nintendo, as they wouldn't have an extremely similar game in name and concept being released on the direct competitor, stating that they felt it was used deliberately for promotional purposes, bringing false recognition to users. This led to the team changing the name of the title to Tear Ring Saga, and removing any direct references to Fire Emblem, a month and a half prior to release. These initial changes allowed the game to be released as scheduled, but Nintendo still sued Turnanog and their publisher, Interbrain, for still infringing on game licenses and copyrights. While the lawsuit never came of anything, this series itself soon fell into obscurity, along with the creator of Fire Emblem himself. So what do you think of all these controversies? Which one pushes you in the wrong way the most? And would you like to learn more about the Fire Emblem franchise, like its creation and history? If so, then check out Chronicles of Fire Emblem, a series that I'm doing the voiceover for right here over on the Chronicles channel. And until next time, you stay awesome and never stop using that noggin. Controversy. It's a word we tend to throw around a lot in the gaming culture, especially nowadays. From censorship to cutting out features that were always a part of the games they came with, there's always something happening that's throwing gamers into a tizzy. Even the often critically acclaimed Fire Emblem franchise has fallen victim to this trend. What with the whole Shin Megami Tensei cross Fire Emblem game turning into J-pop idol stories, having some ludicrous name that no one in a particular region would understand. One of the characters from Path of Radiance named Mist actually had to be renamed Alja, of all things, in the German localization, despite her name being one of a mythological Valkyrie. But why was it changed? Because Mist in German is a curse word. That means shit. Literally, shit. So take that as you will. Famously, Marth, the iconic swordsman from that one Fire Emblem game that you may have played, Super Smash Bros. Melee, was originally called Prince Mars when he made his first appearance internationally in Fire Emblem the anime. This anime's dub was so bad that it's good, and thus really didn't do much to help with Marth's appearance. Number 9. Cut content from Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem. Now here is where we get into some actual controversy for the series. The first one, to be exact, many changes were made to the games, and in particular, people's names. Many of the names in Fire Emblem continuity are references to mythological beings, often which tie into a character's persona, such as Nana from Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War being named after the Norse goddess, and weapons such as the Ragnarok and Guy Bulg being consistent throughout the series. So while localizing them to another country, it's difficult trying to maintain this while not. But did you know that there are even more controversial changes to Fire Emblem that you have never heard of? Well, today I'm here to help you learn a little something with Fire Emblem's Top 10 Controversies. Number 10. Name changes. Now, this little tidbit is easily the least controversial subject on the list, but that's why it's number 10. It's still very interesting, though, to say the least. As the Fire Emblem games have started to be ported internationally over the past